The people of Rome did not know they wanted Caesar until they had Caesar. Likewise, audiences are craving an authentic, bold celebration of excellence, even if they don't consciously know they are. At the same time, there is an increasing wariness of the dominant media zeitgeist, which is to pander, subvert, or play itself for laughs. There is an untapped market for media that, on both an aesthetic and thematic level, eschews being inoffensive or revisionist in favor of being genuine, striking, and unapologetically about greatness as understood in the sense of traditionally great heroes, warriors, conquerors, and nations. Being constantly involved in trends and discussions around history, film, media literacy, and so on, I've noticed this latent pull towards media that provides even a facsimile of these elements and a growing rejection of media that doesn't. If a truly visionary creator makes an earnest, aesthetically daring exaltation of vitality, power, and victory, they will strike gold. This theory has been coalescing in my head for about a year and a half, developing as new media releases and discourse around media progresses. I will provide my examples in the chronological order that I either encountered them or had fresh insights about them, before bringing everything together for my own vision about what this groundbreaking piece may look like. The genesis for this topic really developed in my head when the first trailer for the Minecraft movie released, and it was dripping in that Reddit tier self-aware cringe. This was also at the same time that dark fantasy AI trend was at its peak, and quite a few TikTok creators posted pictures and videos of the Minecraft movie if it was made in a dark fantasy style instead of the generically goofy version we are set to get. These posts did really well, getting lots of attention in comments, voicing their agreement that the dark fantasy versions were superior, which I agree with. I sensed this desire for a genuine fantasy aesthetic that was not being satisfied by modern media. Even disregarding the Minecraft example, this dark fantasy trend was all over the place and is still kicking around even now. You can argue that since it is only AI art, it is unsatisfactory, which is exactly my point. People clearly like this style and are gravitating to it, even though plenty of contemporary fantasy media exists. The dark fantasy aesthetic, of course, did not originate with AI, but rather is exemplified by many classic fantasy movies and games, especially from the 80s. Where modern media is lacking, the oldies pick up the slack. I don't know if you can even call it nostalgia, because many who were not even alive for that era are digging up these old films. Most importantly among these is Excalibur. Excalibur is one of my favorite movies of all time, as you can probably tell by the poster behind me, which is from its original theatrical release, by the way. A while back, I did a review of it on TikTok, and to this day, it is one of my most watched long form posts and by far my most successful film related video. I have seen countless other posts across other sites that celebrate Excalibur as well, like Renaissance Italy rediscovering the beauty of classical Greco Roman art. Excalibur seems to have had its own little revival. As an aside, I've tweeted that Excalibur is one of the most metaphysically significant films of the 20th century, and that its greatest impact is yet to be felt. But that deserves a video of its own. Excalibur is singular, unlike any medieval or fantasy movie we've had in recent times. While it is not at all historically accurate, it has a certain authenticity that draws you into this mystic, lost age. Much of that is due to the film's visuals, cinematography, and score. The bright plates of shining armor, the otherworldly effects, the brilliant use of Wagner's music. But it is more than that. It's a fidelity to the values that have made the legend of King Arthur so pervasive since the men that inspired the tale itself drew breath. When I watch Excalibur, I want to pick up a sword and rally my knights to cast down evil. I wonder how many young English squires hundreds of years ago felt the same impulse reading or listening to their contemporary renditions of King Arthur. There is no modern political commentary in Excalibur, nor attempt to tailor the story to our moral sensibilities. Its entire sense of good and evil, of honor and character, is archaic to modern society. Even the way it treats its metaphysical concepts, the shift from the pagan into the Christian, the oneness of the king in the land itself, Merlin and Morgana's magic, the unseen ethereal entity referred to as the dragon, none of these are made to fit our understanding of religion or fantasy magic. That's what makes Excalibur so powerful and engaging. It goes all in on the legendary fantasy and plays it straight. Sure, some may call it ridiculous or strange, but it doesn't try and shield itself with any sense of ironic self awareness. Unfortunately, this raw authenticity to being boldly what it is seems to be nearly lost in today's media. A recent production that, like Excalibur, had excellent source material to work with is Netflix's Alexander, the Making of a God, which, like so many modern projects, flopped with audiences. It was doomed as soon as we saw Alexander's costume design. It should be a crime to call your series The Making of a God and dress him like that. Like the majority of recent historical productions, it went for a muted, gritty, generic look that isn't even close to reality. This artist sketched a version that not only looks far better, but is plausibly what the man would have worn. Both Excalibur and Alexander have ahistorical armor designs, but one clearly has awe and vision behind it, and the other does not. Aesthetics tend to go hand in hand with theme, and this is the same for Excalibur and Alexander. Excalibur is legendary in the most literal sense, while Alexander breaks the titular king down into a banal, regular dude. People are getting tired of having larger than life figures be banal, regular dudes. One of the few filmmakers right now who doesn't follow this modern trend is Robert Eggers. Now, I'm not going to say that Eggers is a super genius or the greatest director of all time or anything like that. What makes him stand out right now, though, is that he makes films that actually try to be authentic to the time period they portray, and on every level. The costumes, the casting, the dialogue, the story. Every single detail is meant to bring you into its world, not it into your world. I think The Northman best exemplifies this. It is a bloody, violent tale in which its hero Amleth at one point butchers a village alongside his Viking comrades with no moral compunctions, as if such a thing were common and justifiable. That's because in those times, it was. Their sense of right and wrong had an entirely different relationship with violence. Many directors would be tempted to either tone down Amleth's brutality or make him realize at some point that it is an ethically wrong thing to do, or cast him as a morally distorted anti-hero the audience shouldn't support. Eggers does not do this. He portrays Amleth authentically, based on the values and moral perceptions of the original story and other Norse sagas. This approach inevitably alienates some in modern audiences, but its willingness to stay true to its source is refreshing. Eggers engages with history on its own terms, refusing to project modern paradigms onto the stories he does. While we're discussing Eggers, I recently saw Nosferatu with my father while visiting over the holidays, and once again, Eggers' love for the original Nosferatu film and the period it is set in remains his top priority. Even the Prussian soldiers, who appear on screen for probably no more than 20 seconds combined, wear the exact kind of hat that the Prussian army issued to its troops in that specific period. I'm sure 99.99% of people who see Nosferatu would never notice this, but this excruciating level of detail underpins his entire artistic philosophy, and that's what makes it special. However, as much as I have praised Eggers, he has not hit one element that prevents him from fully capturing what I am talking about, at least so far. His films are usually dark and depressing, with an obvious penchant for horror. There is little triumph or feel good in his movies. The closest I can think of is the ending of The Northman, where at least Amleth's family will be safe and he will go to Valhalla, but it is undeniable Eggers leans towards the morbid and ominous. Eggers can pull off a historically authentic, macabre tale, but it is yet to be seen if he could tackle a film with greatness as its core theme. Certainly, though, Ridley Scott cannot. Not long after the dark fantasy trend peaked, I saw Napoleon. It was more than willing to sacrifice historical authenticity for the sake of its subversive portrayal of Napoleon as a geriatric-looking, pussy-whipped man-child. Bluntly, Phoenix was a terrible choice for this role. He was far too old, and he played Napoleon like his depiction of Commodus in Gladiator mixed with Arthur Fleck in The Joker. If Scott dislikes Napoleon so much, I would have no qualms with him making a film from another perspective. I think a biopic following the Duke of Wellington's career would be amazing. A look at the man who put down Napoleon's ambitions for good, a heroic story in its own right. But he didn't want to make anything inspiring. Clearly, it was made in the vein of deconstructing one of the greats, which might have at least been unique decades ago, but has basically become our cultural zeitgeist. Unfortunately for him, it cannot escape the grandness of its own story, no matter how hard he tries. Despite how terrible it was, there were still moments where you catch a glimpse of excellence. Because of this, you still had people out there making edits of the film that actually look powerful and uplifting, pulling shavings of gold from the rubbish and polishing them up. This is what people went to see Napoleon for. Not the edits themselves, obviously, but the spirit they were trying to tap into. The life of a master visionary, a truly classical man who nearly had the European continent in his palm, but let it slip through his fingers. Napoleon was not well received in the slightest, but it was all we were given, and so people went to see it anyway. This is where the whole media literacy debate starts to come into play. A mismatch of the high-minded intent of the creator and the primordial truth of storytelling. People, fundamentally, like stories of greatness, power, and achievement. It's why across history and world civilizations, the great heroes, both fictional and real, tend to be warriors, explorers, and conquerors. They slay great beasts, venture beyond to the ends of the world, and lay low their enemies. As different as cultures can be, you find these common themes in the history and legends of the Aztecs, the Greeks, the Japanese, so on and so forth. This isn't some psychological deviancy, but a very deliberate, evolutionarily beneficial preference, born from conditions where driving off the bear, finding resource-rich grounds, or defeating a rival tribe could mean the difference between life or death for those you care about. And either being that man or following that man was what had to be done. As far as modern morality has come, our brains are still wired this way, and that is why we like stories about these things. However, from the modern paradigm we've developed, such impulses are seen, rightly or wrongly, as immoral and dangerous. For many creators today, making media about mastery of space and superiority over others would be immoral and dangerous. But what sounds like more fun to you? A game where you blow up a bunch of aliens in the name of humanity? Or a game where you sit in a circle and sing Kumbaya with them? So modern artists who fancy themselves morally responsible are left with a dilemma. How do they create cool stories and experiences without implicitly endorsing themes of violence and dominance? Subversion and deconstruction, the vaunted label of satire, is how they get to have their cake and eat it too. At least when you don't want to go the route of making it entirely lame and silly. Now, you can have your awesome video game about blowing up a bunch of aliens while still retaining your moral purity because it's actually satire and it's about how the humans are really the bad guys. Even better, when people don't appreciate that aspect and like it because it appeals to our primeval psychology, you can sit on your intellectual high horse and go on about how these stupid chuds don't have media literacy and are misinterpreting your message. This is exemplified by the Helldivers, Warhammer 40K, and Starship Troopers media literacy debate, which comes up every year like clockwork and was especially prevalent in that same period of time that Napoleon and the other examples I provided peaked in relevance. Let's face it, the selling point of those franchises aren't their poignant, a term I use very loosely, satire about militarism and jingoism and all of that. The selling point is blowing up a bunch of aliens and looking damn cool doing so. That's what the majority of people enjoy. Most of us get that it's supposed to be making fun, but we can't be bothered to care. Once again, edits come up. People love making mashup videos of these franchises, showing humans kicking Xeno ass and looking awesome. This isn't something I considered until I got to this part of my script, but edits, as a media form, seem to be the anti-subversion medium. They strip visual art back to its core appeal, the primordial values of beauty and power that lay at the base of our psyche. Media literacy midwits hate edits, when enjoyed earnestly at least, precisely because edits throw out all the insipid moralizing that they find so intelligent. It's ironic because Starship Troopers itself is a bad faith bastardization of the novel that completely goes against Heinlein's themes because Paul Verhoeven hated the book so much. When Paul does it, it's cutting satire. But when a guy cuts up the footage into an edit that brings the values back to the original story, suddenly he doesn't understand the source material. That is really at the core of the debate. It isn't really about intellectual or artistic rationale. It is about fundamentally opposing value systems. Most people want the cool, inspiring stuff, but we are only getting it with the caveat of satire. Before I tie everything back together, let's talk about one more piece of media, Dune, as the last part of the new rendition came out just in time for the last round of the media literacy war. Dune is interesting because it seems like Herbert himself struggled with this question as he wrote the books, and you can see that dissonance translates somewhat into this adaptation. Aesthetically and thematically, it seems to be at odds with itself, a microcosm of the crossroads our culture stands at as a whole. Whether it be AI, decades old film, media that is explicitly hostile to them, audiences are grasping for something out of reach. They are souring on things that are uninspired, even when it comes from industry titans like Scott, who will still get a begrudging pass from me because of Blade Runner and Alien. Authenticity, excellence, and boldness are pieces of iron right now that are hot. And if a true master with vision and skill smelted them into a magnificent piece of media, they would have unfettered success. What might such a piece look like, though? There are countless stories that could be made this way. The key is in the execution. But if I was a producer with millions of dollars, I would look to adapt underexplored historical accounts like Xenophon's Anabasis or Bernal Diaz's True History of the Conquest of New Spain. Archetypal stories of strength, cunning, and loyalty prevailing in a hostile land. Or perhaps a biopic of a revolutionary warlord, such as Alaric the Barbarian, Genghis Khan, or Shaka Zulu. I would not look to downplay or omit any avarice or brutality on behalf of the protagonists, nor exaggerate that of their enemies. Rather, I would aim to put the viewer in the shoes of these daring, bellicose men whose disposition and values are so alien to us. The enormous danger of their undertakings, the extreme skill, determination, and courage it took to see it through, and the legacies they left behind would be the quote-unquote point. Like a nature documentary following a pride of lions, observing these noble and powerful beasts in their element. If I made it a straight historical adaptation, I would absolutely look to provide the most authentic visual depiction of the armor, weapons, etc. However, I may be tempted to render the tale in a sci fi or even post apocalyptic setting, not to simply make it more accessible to modern audiences, but to anchor it in the future, to make its primordial truths timeless and remind us that we are in an anomalous, fragile place in history. Either way, I would aesthetically aim for a bright, colorful look with an intensely dramatic and occasionally surreal presentation. Such a story done proper would be a breath of fresh air for an audience that didn't know it was choking until it tasted pure oxygen.